Okay, we are now recording. Welcome to this week's episode to Microverse's Lunch and Learn. I'm Paul. Kyle was supposed to be co-hosting today, but he's off doing an interview, so we're wishing him good luck on that. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I'll just remind you quickly that Microverse is a coding school where people from all around the world learn to code by pair programming with team members and students who enroll in the program. They don't pay anything until they get a job. It's one of the highlights of the program. Every week, we bring in guest speakers to share their professional journeys and their experiences working on topics such as pair programming, remote work, and open source, etc. This week, our guest is Álvaro Trigo from Spain. He'll give us a talk about how open source became my full-time job. So, hello, Álvaro. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Paul. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, this will be a pretty free-flowing presentation today. You can feel free to perhaps tell us a story or a variation of or some form of your story of how you got to where you are today, life advice you have, work advice you have, any specifics, do's and don'ts you've encountered, real talk, anything you'd like to share. What will happen is people will be able to ask questions. One of the best ways to do that, to anyone listening right now, there is a Q&A section in the chat box here. You can ask questions there. And if that works well, we'll continue with that format. And as we go through, we'll probably let you speak first, Alvaro. Then we'll look at the Q&A, and we'll go through them one at a time as they show up.
All right. So if you want, I can start just telling a bit about how I started to be interested in web developing and computer science in general. So when I was I was 16, I was in high school. And it was my first time that I enrolled into a computer science class. And at that time, the teacher taught us how to make websites using Microsoft Word. So I started creating a website just for fun outside my lessons for firecrackers and fireworks. And with the time, it started having some visitors, and then so it motivated me to keep working on it, and I kept learning by myself aside from the lessons. So from there on, I became interested on web developing. I started with Dreamweaver, macromedia software. I don't know if you remember. Later on, I started learning about CSS, PHP, and so on. And afterwards, I decided to join my computer science degree. So I was studying computer science for like 5 years, in which, by the way, they didn't really teach us so much about web developing. It was more about C, Java, C++, and so on. So I had to learn kind of by myself. By looking at the internet tutorials or YouTube videos and this kind of stuff. So later on, after I finished studying my degree, I looked for a job abroad and found a job in Cambridge in the UK, where I stayed working as a web developer, full it was back-end and front-end web developing, so full stack for like 5 years. I was creating web applications mainly, started working with PHP, then turning to JavaScript, Node.js, Knockout.js. You might not know about it, but it's a similar framework to Angular and React and so on, but a bit more old school. And it was while I was working in that company when I decided to create my first JavaScript project. So in this case, it was a full page. It was my first JavaScript. It was a jQuery plugin at the time. So I decided to create a repository for it. It was my first public repository, I think. And it started having followers and so on. And since then on, I started working on it as a side project by myself, just put in some hours after I finished working and so on. And to the point that I ended up quitting my job and dedicating full time to it when I saw I could make some living out of it. That's basically it. If you have any questions or like how should we go about it? Should I get more into specifics, or let me see the Q&A?
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that, Alvaro. Pretty interesting. Again, as people will start thinking about questions now, I guess some questions would be, did you initially think you could get full-time income, worth of income?
Yeah, no, really. So when I started, it was just for fun. You create a project, and then you work on it, and then you see that people start using it. So that's something very powerful. It motivates a lot, seeing that people is using the code that you created, right? And then you can see it working in certain websites and in ways that you maybe didn't even think about. They usually suggest new features or or they tell you that they found some bugs and so on. So you keep working on it. And it was not really, I was not really thinking about working on it full time or anything like that, or making any money out of it. It was just for fun. I enjoyed it, and it's a very nice motivation seeing that people use it. So that's what usually makes you keep working on it just for free. So I was actually working on it for free for like about 3 years and a half, 4 years, something like that.
Wow.
So at that point, there were already many companies using it, like big companies like Sony or British Airways, McDonald's, and then is when I decided to create some extensions that would be they wouldn't be free, so they would have to pay for them, but I was planning to provide them at a very reasonable price, like 25 pounds or something on this kind of range. So that's when I started thinking about making some money out of it. And it was basically because I had so many people requesting me new features that I was not really planning to include on the framework because, well, they would require more code, and I didn't want to make the code bigger or this kind of thing. So many people asking for the same thing, and I ended up thinking, well, why don't create an extension for it so people can just get what they want, but aside from the main project.
Okay, so that almost sounds like effectively it was not intentional, and so you created something that was useful to a lot of people, including, especially in particular, speaking to big companies. So once you create something that was useful to big companies, and they wanted more beyond that, that's when the potential for money from it came about. Would that be correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Okay, very interesting.
Well, the thing is, when you work on one of on these kind of projects, sometimes you can get so many requests for many new features or some bugs or even some help. Maybe they want to implement your solution, but they don't know how, or they don't know enough JavaScript. So you start having requests and asking for help. And so, well, there's some point in which you cannot attend all of those requests, or you don't feel like you have the time or the motivation to help everybody that is asking for it. So I think it's natural also trying to make some money out of it, because at the end of the day, you cannot be consulting for free for everybody. I think it's natural. So in fact, I think it helps as well to improve the library itself, because if there's a bigger motivation underneath, if you can feel like you don't have to sacrifice your free time to do something good, but you can also make of it your full-time job, then, well, I think it's going to help the library to become better and better.
Okay. Questions also come to mind. There's some more coming up in the Q&A, but just to jump in here, I'm wondering, how is it that the monetary value makes it effectively into your pockets, into your bank account? So for example, I do some freelance work, and as do some of us in the boot camp here, and the simplest way, especially for like short-term contracts, short pages, is just money into a PayPal account. For you, these companies that are basically sending out requests for these extensions for you, how do you guys perform some kind of contract? Okay, I'll fill out, here's your request for what you want from this extension. Here's, I estimate this many hours, or I'm going to charge you this. How does that work out to getting an agreement for these big companies to you for these extensions, and then how do you get paid typically?
Yeah, so when I started, they were requesting features, and what I was doing was usually modifying the library for them, so modifying the core code. So I more or less calculated how much time it was going to take, or if it was possible or not, and then based on that, I usually set the price for them. So just talking with them by email usually, and then created an invoice and so on. So it was very manual at the start. Price was also higher because it was requiring me more time to do so. Once I started thinking about providing it for more people, I created it as an extension. So I didn't have to modify the core code anymore. And I was providing the same piece of code for everybody who was requesting it, right? So this way I was able to reduce the cost of it a lot. And well, I decided to upload it to my website. And well, I don't know if you were asking about how do I sell the software. I was using a service in the middle. It's called Gumroad. I don't know if you've heard about it before.
Are you able to spell out the name of it in the chat? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. Gumroad.com. So this is a service that basically provides you a way to upload any digital content that you want. It can be a book. It can be a file. It can be a PDF. It can be an image, a video, and then you just set the price, and you get a link that you can share with people, so they can buy your product from there, and they can usually pay by a card or even by PayPal. So I didn't really have to deal with Stripe or PayPal by myself. I didn't want to code for it yet. I wanted something fast and quick, and this seemed like a good solution for it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll now start going through the questions that are coming in through the Q&A. So the first one's from Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, what is the process that you went through to decide to do full-time? If you have other ideas too, how did you know there was such a huge demand for that idea? So I think you partially answered some of these topics as well, but was there other ideas you had in mind, I suppose, is what he's getting at? And or was this one by surprise?
Yeah, I guess like every developer, we have our own little ideas that we want to implement, or the points in which I created full page, I was just trying to find a way to create my first jQuery plugin, because I mainly wanted to experiment with it. I was not very experienced with this kind of, creating a plugin for jQuery. So it was just an exercise I wanted to do by myself. So I was at that moment creating a website with this kind of feature for the company I was working for. And I was creating it from the scratch. I remember my boss was telling me something like they wanted to create a website that looked kind of like a PowerPoint presentation. And then checking some websites online, I think including the Apple website at the time, the iPhone, I think it was iPhone 5, they were using this kind of feature. So I decided to go for it and code it for my company. But while I was doing it, I realized there was nothing like any tool to create this kind of websites on the internet. So that's why I decided to create one, because I thought it was a nice thing to have. But really, I didn't have any idea of how many people would be interested on it. In fact, I think I got very surprised when I uploaded it, and maybe after a week or two, I noticed there were like 400 likes on GitHub. So I started realizing, people seem to be interested on it. And I kept working harder and trying to solve issues faster, release new versions, and so on. So it wasn't like an idea I had in my mind that I thought, I should create this in order to, create a successful library or whatever. It just came out naturally.
Okay, that kind of rolls into the next question quite well. Alvaro Sanchez from Mexico asks, how do you know companies are using your jQuery product? Other than, is it just likes on GitHub, or are there other ways you knew that these big companies were using your software?
Yeah, so this was, it was not easy. There's no really a way that you can check if certain websites are making use of your library. But I remember there was a website created by Shapiro. I forgot the name. It was a website in which you could check within the top, I don't know, top 100 websites in the world, which ones were using which kind of library.
Okay.
So I really forgot about the name. But thanks to that website, I was able to check which of the most important websites were using my framework. So then I would go into each website just to double check and see which ones were really using it, or if it was a false positive. And there I found some of them. So that's how it started, yeah. And sometimes even by chance, just Googling something, then I realized, oh, this website is using it. But yeah, it was, I think, mainly thanks to this website.
Point, think about the name of this website. If later on in the conversation, if you think of it, go ahead and write it in the chat. That'd be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. That answers that question. Another one here is Alvaro Sanchez again would like to know, can you explain a bit more of what the original project was? So maybe a bit more detail about what you specifically wanted to solve or fix, perhaps just in a slightly more elaborate way.
Yeah, well, basically, full page is full screen slider. So it's a slider that goes vertically and horizontally. You slide using the mouse wheel or the trackpad, and then it just snaps to the next section or the next slide. So basically, what I wanted to do is just slide from one section to another one by using the trackpad, like a full screen. Like I said, my boss wanted some kind of PowerPoint presentation. So the idea was creating different sections, full screen, and then be able to navigate through them by using the mouse wheel. So that was basically it.
Perhaps if I'm speculating here, extrapolating, a website like, I remember you saying McDonald's,
yeah.
They may want, I don't know, for example, if they have a menu on their website and they want, or a grocery store uses things like this. When people scroll, they want to flick through one entire page at a time. Is that sort of what you're describing?
Yeah. I mean, if you check the website of the library itself, you can see pretty well what it does. So This is the main website. See if I can give you a real example of it.
I'm just trying to get a full example of it.
So right now, let's see.
Oh, I see. So now with one flick of the mouse wheel, you go entirely one entire page. You're not incrementing slowly through from one page to the next. It's just every flick of your mouse or every notch in your mouse wheel. Some nice wheels, you can feel every notch you as you scroll.
Exactly.
Okay,
So technically it wasn't so easy to detect at the moment. Just one scroll, especially on Apple trackpads or Apple mouses, which they use some kind of scrolling that is called, well, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it properly, but kinetic scrolling, something like this. So every time you scroll, the JavaScript doesn't detect only one single scroll event, but hundreds of them. So there was some kind of difficulty there trying to make it work for these kind of devices. And that was part of what the library also solved. And there you have a link of the BBC using it if you want to see it in a real example.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And so did you have to have different implementations for a desktop with a mouse and a scroll wheel versus on mobile? Is there any applications to mobile as well?
Yeah. So, the default scroll for mobile devices wasn't very elaborate. It was just, it wasn't like real time. Like you cannot just drag slowly one slide and moves at the same time that you move your finger. So it was basically just detecting whether you scroll up or down and then scrolling up or down. But afterwards, I decided to release an extension to solve this issue and make it a bit more smooth. So it can be like real-time dragging and dropping. Yeah.
Okay, very
But yeah,
cool.
the implementation was different.
Was it a challenge to make it implemented on both those environments? So again, the desktop/laptop environment versus on touch device?
Yeah, there was some difficulties on the way because, well, full page provides so many options. So sometimes, well, the more options you provide, the more difficult adding a new feature can be. So in this case, for example, you can have a scroll bar on the side, or you can decide not to have the scroll bar. So depending on these kind of things, the implementation can be totally different. And that was something to add that, well, makes it a bit more complicated. Also, it supports CSS3, but at the time I was also providing support even for Internet Explorer 8. So you can imagine that sometimes coding for it can be a bit more difficult.
Oh yes, because everyone likes making it compatible for Internet Explorer, of course.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all fantastic. So now I guess the questions I also have are, now that you've been able to turn this into a source of income for you, in your mind, you must have gone through this where you're asking yourself, okay, would I prefer having a regular, dependable source of income from a full-time job where I go to an office, typically Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, or whatever the hours may be, and deal with a boss on a regular basis, versus what you're doing, which is in some ways open source/freelancing, and then basically charging these companies for these extensions. Could you discuss how you decide what you prefer, what you do, and what aspects of it you prefer compared to a more traditional office job? I guess you could say more traditional role.
Yeah. So, I never liked really the idea of staying 8 hours working in an office just for the fact of it. So sometimes I felt like I was in the office just kind of trying to fill the time, like maybe I didn't have many things to do, but I had to stay there until 6 p.m. or whatever. So that's one of the things I really don't like about working for an office. Another thing is, well, you always have a boss. So sometimes you have to please the boss and not yourself, right? So, well, even I also noticed that when I was working in the company and I was designing something or making some website or whatever that I liked, then I used to work on it pretty hard, and I was very productive. But whenever I had to do something that I didn't like, just because I was told to do so, I realized that my productivity went down, and I was not so motivated. And well, you just do things because they tell you to do, or you might not even agree what you have to do, or the way you have to do it, or the design, or so it's not a good feeling doing something that you are not really enjoying. And what I think that really makes the difference is when you work for yourself, you can see the results. So you know that if you work harder, you are going to get better results. And you're going to see that usually reflected on the amount of income that you're going to get from it. You can see how your marketing campaigns work or how they don't, and then you can keep improving and so on. But working for yourself, I think it's something very powerful because it really motivates you to do what you are doing, and feeling that you are in control of everything. I think that's the main difference between working for somebody and working for yourself. And well, in my case, the decision wasn't really so difficult because I only decided to quit my company when I was already gaining enough with my side job to do so. So to the point that I was already making more with my side project, in this case, Full Page, that working for my company, even though I.
And what did you tell your company when you were leaving?
Sorry?
What did you tell your company when you were leaving?
What did I tell them? Well, I just told them I needed to change. I was working in the UK, in Cambridge, for 5 years. And I was, in fact, thinking about going back to Spain at some point. So I think it was the perfect moment to tell them that I wanted to leave and go back to Spain.
You didn't even disclose, oh, I'm leaving because I'm making more money doing my own thing?
No, I didn't do so. No.
Okay. And so would you say there are any downsides, if there's any at all, to what you're doing now versus working at the typical full-time job?
Well, yeah, one thing is for sure, when you work for yourself, and you have a product like this, you can never predict how much are you going to get at the end of the month, or how much are you going to get next month. So, well, it can feel a bit scary sometimes. You never have the certainty of knowing that next month you're going to keep getting the same amount of money on your pocket. Although it usually keeps, I never really had any downs, but that's one of the aspects that I can see. Another one maybe, they usually say you work harder when you work for yourself. In my case, this wasn't true, but I can say that it is true that you keep thinking about your project even outside working hours, right? So you might be lying in bed at 11 p.m. at night, and suddenly you find some video on YouTube talking about, I don't know, some JavaScript thing or some marketing technique, or so you just start seeing it, or so you just keep thinking about it even outside your working hours, which, well, really is not, for me, it's not such a big problem because I really enjoy it. So it's like a hobby for me, right? I would be doing it anyways. But it is true that maybe your mind doesn't rest so much as it does when you work for somebody else. Because in those cases, you arrive home at 5 p.m. and you forget about anything you were doing in the office because it's not your business, right? Yeah.
Very good points. So it sounds like one of the downsides as well is that there's a bit less regularity to your source of income. But what you've also described, it sounds like there's a bit more of a direct correlation, a stronger correlation between effort and compensation, or effort and reward, which is more fulfilling, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah,
that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, another question here. Is there any other open source projects that's caught your attention recently? Anything you found very interesting? Anything that you think, oh, that's a cool idea, or things you made, perhaps you enjoy contributing to?
Yeah, well, I usually enjoy a lot when I see people like me creating projects that, they are good, or that they try to make a living out of them. So one of the ones I found was FirePond, which is a pretty cool library to upload images into websites. So I found it, I don't know how, probably randomly on Twitter. And I always like taking a look at the code, see how they do it, or what kind of things they use, or, well, motivates me a lot as well. And I think I try to encourage people to do these kind of things, because when you look at the open source environment, you see a lot of big companies playing on it. So you can see Google, you can see Facebook, you can see all kind of big companies creating huge frameworks, or, but I usually like also to see just random people creating projects that they might become something bigger in the future. So this is one of the ones I found, but I also like to see others, like, which is the other one? So there's one called Impress. There's one, Scroll, Reveal. Yeah, these kind of things.
Very cool. So do you contribute to a bunch of other ones on a part-time basis for fun? And has any other project made some income for you, or has it always entirely been full page?
Yeah, basically it has been only full page. Well, full page has many phases, right? Because every time I create a new extension, or it's kind of like a new product. But yeah, it's mainly full page. And about contributing to another open source project, well, I don't really do much of that. When I was working in the company and I had to use other projects for my web applications and so on, I used to, sometimes try to provide, a new feature that I found that I was missing on that framework, or try to fix some bug or something. So yeah, sometimes I used to provide some pull requests and to see if they were implemented, instead of having to create my own custom code. So it can be easily maintained in the future. But yeah, I don't really work too much on other open source codes. Yeah.
Okay. I guess a question I may have that may or may not have been an issue for you, but have you ever encountered or had any situations where, because you created this code and it started off as open source, and then from there you're doing extensions basically by request or for one way or another contract to these companies. Have you ever run into scenarios where other companies were utilizing your code and it became an issue of information property or IP for you, where you were not being compensated for your work and you had to go after them? Has anything like that ever come up for you?
Mm-hmm. So, well, I really didn't have much problem regarding the use of my library without the license, because, well, I was providing full page under the MIT license, MIT. So it was free. Sorry, yeah, MIT. So it was free to use, free to modify, everything. So they could use it. Regarding the extensions, I usually provide some security measures, so they cannot really steal them from me without buying them. So the extensions, for example, if you go to my demo websites where I show the extensions, the file that you'll find, the JavaScript file, will only work on that website. So they cannot just steal it and use it. But in the recent version on full page 3, I've changed the license from MIT to GPL. So if they want to use it in a non-open source project, they'll have to get the license for a very small price. It starts from £9. But I don't really have the control over how people is using it. So if somebody decides to take it and use it on their website, which is not open source, well, there's nothing I can do. You know, JavaScript developers, we are a bit limited here. It's not like, you know, WordPress theme developers or PHP libraries, or we cannot really have control over these things because it's a client library, and everybody can have access to the code, and there's no connection between my servers and their servers, so yeah, there's nothing we can do here. So yeah, there might be people that is using it without the proper license, but usually companies, they like to have things in order. In case they have any, you know, somebody comes and check if they are using things properly and so on, an audition. So yeah, it's not a big problem for me at the moment, because, well, most of the people who use my library is people working for companies. I can see that during the weekends, the sales go down quite a lot. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, so your sales are basically how often the page is it, when you describe that on weekends the sales go down, is that because it's the actual live utilization of each website on a weekday basis, or is it how often companies are open and people contact you to buy it? Is that how that works?
Well,
what makes it weekdays? Yeah,
the number of sales goes down a lot on the weekends. So that's basically how I can get an idea of who are the ones using my library. Because, well, if you use it for fun, you usually work during the weekends, right? But if you work for a company, then it's when you from Monday to Friday is when you buy things, when you do stuff. So yeah, also the number of emails that I have goes down during the weekends and so on. So my weekends are quite relaxed.
Okay,
yeah,
that's quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then was the licensing, I believe you called it a JBL license, if I heard you correctly?
JBL version 3, yeah.
Yeah, JBL. Was that a very complex process to go through?
What, the change of license?
Yes.
Well, no. Really, the only thing I had to do was, well, change it on the repository, and then create a way for people to get a non-GPL license, right? So I just had to create the website and the pricing page and so on, but yeah, it wasn't too difficult. So I did it right after I released the new version 3, which got rid of jQuery. So I think it was the right time to start charging for it after almost 4-5 years for free.
Okay. We have another question here from, again, I hope I say this correctly. It's Osvaldo Maria. I hope I say that properly. The question here is listed as, are you the sole official maintainer of a project with 24K stars? If so, why?
Yeah, I am the only one. Why? Because, well, I'm very happy when I see pull requests of people and I see people trying to collaborate. So I don't have anything against that. It never happened that somebody asked me to be a maintainer of my project. Like people usually, they don't work for free. They might collaborate from time to time to fix issues they have when they are implemented it on their websites or on their workplaces. But it's not easy to just find somebody that randomly asks to collaborate and to become a maintainer of a project. So that's basically why. Yeah.
Okay. And another question here. It's similar-ish, perhaps to previous question. What are the things you enjoy the most about managing an open source project, and the things you enjoy the least?
The most. Well, as I said, it's a very nice satisfaction when you see people using it. Even when they provide some fixes that you, for the code that you wrote, that is very satisfactory, right? And then the things that I usually like the less are maybe trying to provide support to all kind of people, right? So people who don't really know much about websites, don't really know much about JavaScript, and they ask sometimes very basic questions, right? So, well, I usually answer everybody, but sometimes it can get a bit annoying. So that's why I recently, on the license system, I said that I only provide email support for people who's actually paying a bit more, because otherwise I just lose my time providing support to people that, well, they just don't know much about web design or web developing. So it's like I'm giving them my time for free, and I'm not going to get anything back, because usually also these kind of people, they don't end up purchasing anything or buying an extension or so. Yeah, basically that's what I think I would enjoy the less. Or when you get people asking you to help them for free, like they think they deserve free support, and they kind of give it for granted. And if you say no, they might even get upset and reply a bit angry. So that is the thing that I like the less, when people don't really value the work you are putting on it, and when they don't realize that you also have to make a living out of it. And that the way that people have to value the work that you do, right? So I think that's mainly it.
Okay, that fully makes sense. And a lot of people who are not in the tech community, they don't really understand what it takes to even accomplish even a small detail. Like until you've been in the industry, they won't be aware. To them, a visual change of changing something from one shape to another, or how it behaves, may seem very small to them.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then as soon as once you actually try to learn how to code, you'll see that a little thing can sometimes be a big difference. So yeah, absolutely, I can see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah. So even sometimes on GitHub, you can see people opening issues saying, "Oh, well, this is missing. This would be very nice. I'm going to use it on my project." And probably many people would like to use it too. Can you just implement it? I need it very soon because I want to finish my website by Friday. And then you see, oh, well, I would like to do so, but I have many other things on my to-do list, and this is not a priority. So, and then, of course, I might go back to the issue, but maybe 3-4 months later. And, it's not like I can just work for people just, for free and based on their requirements instead of on my priorities. So, yeah.
On the actual GitHub repository, since you've opened this, how many issues have been opened/closed? How many issues total? How many are currently open versus closed? That's an interesting question.
Yeah. So right now I have 109 open issues, Some of them are requests for new features, or they can be. There are a few bugs. There are others that might not have a solution. Yeah, and then the closed ones are almost 3,000. It's 2,900.
Wow. Has anyone else come in to just do a pull request in their code because they saw an improvement they could make? Has anyone else tossed in their hat into just trying because they want to make a change? And ever happened?
So right now there are 19 open pull requests. Some of them, they are probably not useful anymore because I changed the whole code recently. There are 368 closed pull requests, from which maybe 10-20% I merge, something like that. But the thing with that is, well, sometimes somebody might provide a great pull request, but then I also need the time to check it. And sometimes, as I said, it's not on my top priority list. So having to spend a few days checking some pull requests that is not on my top priority is not something that I always do. So I just keep them open or these kind of things. But I really appreciate them when they create the pull request, and especially if it solves a bug or provide a feature that might be useful or that is not very complicated to implement, but it never came to my mind, or these kind of things. Yeah.
And so if we look at, again, 109 open issues versus basically 3,000 closed, since what year was this initially started?
So I don't know exactly, but I can check. I think it's 2013 probably.
So 2013, so that's 5 years, and that's 3,000 divided by 5 years. That's 600 pull issues. Closed issues in per year, 600 per year. That's that's 2 per day, approximately.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
Yeah, not bad. I also try to encourage people to really, whenever they open an issue, to provide the information that I need for it, so I would be able to help them faster. So you'll see many of them marked as required reproduction, because sometimes they might think it's a bug, but it's not a bug in my code. It might be a bug in their website or in their code or in any component conflicting with full page. So I try to encourage people to provide reproduction online using CodePen or GS Fiddle or anything like that. Some of them, they get closed because they never provide an isolated reproduction. So I assume that the problem is not on full page if I cannot reproduce it myself with the information they gave.
Very nice. All right. Just as we're getting close to the end of the webinar here, if anyone else has any last questions you'd like to ask Alvaro, please feel free to submit them to the Q&A, and we'll go through those. Just give it a few moments, see if people have any more questions. And once again, somebody will be watching this after the fact because members that are part of this group are from all over the globe, and some of them are right now. That was definitely all of my questions. And again, as you were speaking, it brought up more and more questions for me over time. Okay. Looks like that may be all that we have. But very fascinating. I'm very impressed and very happy for you. They seem to have found a source of lifestyle, a source of income that gives you a lifestyle you enjoy, doing something you enjoy.
Yeah. Yes, it's the freedom that it gives you, I think. Being able to say, oh, well, tomorrow I don't want to work. I want to go somewhere, or I want to go to Hong Kong, or I want to, so you can do all those things that you wouldn't be able to do if you have a normal job. So that's something that I value a lot as well.
Yeah, so this is a remote job and working for yourself. So double benefit there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alvaro, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a fascinating talk. Also, very inspiring.
I think I would like to also finish with something that I didn't mention before. The fact that, well, I think you don't have to be a genius in order to create something like this, like what I did. Like I don't consider myself a genius. In fact, I as I said, it was my first jQuery plugin, one of my first GitHub projects. So I think what is really nice about computer science is that anybody can make anything, and as far as it's useful for other people, well, it can become something. People can start using it. You can start developing it or improving it. So it's important to, I think it's important to know that you don't really have to be like a Mark Zuckerberg or anything like that in order to create something like this and being able to live from it. My code might not be perfect. There are probably many people that would be able to code better than I do. But as long as it works and people use it and people ask for it, well, you have something to work on. So yeah, I think that's important. So anybody who's listening, you don't really have to be a genius. You can just start by yourself, start small, and then, well, it can become bigger if people find it useful.
Well, great points, and thank you for that. There's a couple other questions left here. One that actually just came to mind for me is, how do you think people first started hearing about the possibility of using, like, what brought McDonald's or any big company to find your solution? Anything special you did to draw their attention?
So I remember when I created it, I actually submitted it to a few websites, especially there are like well, there were a lot of websites for jQuery plugins. It's like a directory of plugins and so on. So I remember submitting it to a few of them, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, and then from them on, it started rolling on the internet by itself, like well, I guess Twitter, Facebook, or different blogs talking about it. So it kind of became like a trend for some time. In fact, I was I appeared on GitHub as a trending developer. My project appeared as a trending project as well for a couple of days. And I remember one of my friends on the street saying, "Hey, I saw you on GitHub the other day. You are a trending developer." And I had no idea because I didn't check myself. But I guess these kind of things helped helped the project to become popular. Yeah.
And looking at, for example, on the GitHub repo, I can see your README is pretty well designed, including a nice big, basically a screenshot animation to describe what it does visually. Would you believe then that your README, perhaps in the keywords that are in there, are beneficial for being utilized or found? So perhaps people are searching, they have a problem, they Google that, and just based on the content of the README, maybe even just the name of the plugin itself is just well named. Would you believe that is?
So something I always hated about some libraries, especially backend libraries, is that their documentation is not very clear for people who is not very into backend or very into this kind of coding, right? So when I was creating the documentation, I was trying to do it for somebody that really doesn't understand much about JavaScript or HTML. So I was trying to make things very easy for everybody to understand, and that made it a bit bigger than other documentations can be, right? Maybe not ideal. Some other people have the documentation in their own website instead of on GitHub. But I was trying to encourage people to like the project, to start it, and well, I thought GitHub could be a nice way to have all in one site. Recently also provided documentation in different languages, in Spanish, Russian, Korean, and Chinese, just to make it easier for other people all around the globe. Yeah.
Very good points. All right. Well, once again, thank you very much, Alvaro, for joining us for your inspiring story. And we'll definitely keep in touch with your repo, and we'd love to have you join us again sometime. But again, thank you for telling your story with us and for answering our questions.
All right.
And talk to you later.
All right. So thank you for having me.
Great. And thanks everyone for joining, and for anyone who will watch this later on.
Right.
If you have any, perhaps you may want to post in the chat, maybe if you have a Twitter you'd like us to follow or anything along those lines, perhaps you can post that, and people who will like to follow your progress will.
Yeah, sure. So my Twitter is, I think there was actually a question regarding my Twitter name. It's iMac2. It comes from iMac, the computer, because I was an Apple fan back then when I created it 9 years ago. So iMac was taken, so iMac2.
Perfect.
Thank you, Alvaro, for your questions as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you all have a good day.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.